Welcome. So if you are just arriving, there are refreshments in the back yet, so feel free to help yourself to that. Please also make sure you get your name on a sign-up sheet. We want to make sure we acknowledge that you have gone through the hard work of being here with us today. I'm excited that you're all here. This is, for some of us, a really exciting topic. So we were going to do some kind of, maybe she's not going to do that.
Nope.
So, thank you for coming, and we're going to have a great discussion by Sara from the Education Department, but she is a copyright expert.
Aficionado.
And we will let her have the floor. Thank you, Sara.
Thank you. Just to let you know that I come from the Department of Educational Foundations, Leadership and Technology, which at one time had the longest departmental name on campus. But we have been passed over or overpassed by one of our sister departments of Special Education, Rehabilitation, and Counseling. So that's where I come from. My area of expertise is school libraries and instructional design. A long time ago, when I was in graduate school and I first was introduced to copyright, my initial reaction was that I was a felon, that the Justice Department would be taking me away in chains the next day, and that my school was going to have a lifetime supply of notepaper from all of the illegal copies that I had inadvertently made. So that was back in the, a long time ago. And so ever since then, this has just been an area of interest of mine. And as a result of that, Jan Thornton, who is the director of the Office of Technology Transfer, I don't know if you all are familiar with that office or not, but if you are doing anything involving patents or trademark or anything like that, you would have interaction with her. She and I are co-chairing a committee to revise the university's copyright policy. And I'm going to just pass two groups of these around, just so you can see what our current university policy is. There are two separate documents there. The first one is the copyright policy that if you search in the faculty handbook that you will find. The second one is a policy that comes out of OIT. And as you look at it, what you should notice is its brevity. And its primary focus on who owns the work that you do. Okay, that's what it is primarily focused on. It does not mention anything about how to determine whether or not the use of copyrighted materials for you in instructional settings. There's no guidance in that policy. And so that's what we are going to be attempting to do in addition to updating this. If you'll notice the effective date on it, I don't know if it made it onto the copy on the back page of that first one. The year that it was last revised was what? 84. Yeah, 84. I will just say I was in high school at some time, and one of the years of high school. And so some of you in the room, I don't know where you were in 84, but probably not high school, right? So that's kind of what got everything started. My goal for you today is not to give you anything hard and fast and black and white and definitive, because those things do not exist. Okay? My goal today is for you to walk away and have a way to make a decision about the work that you do in the use of copyrighted materials. Okay, that's my primary goal. My secondary goal is related to the cards that you received. Okay? Because many people, when they hear about copyright, they immediately think, like I did, that they're going to be taken away in chains the next day. You frequently will have questions that you may or may not want to be attributed to you. Okay? So since this is the only person in the room that I know very, very well, and that's okay, I don't know anybody's handwriting or anything like that. If, as we go along, a question occurs to you that you feel good, bad, indifferent about letting the entire group know, if you just write it down on your card, and when we have questions at the end, I'll collect those cards, and that way no one has to admit to any of the questions that they have, because they can be a little revealing sometimes. So we're just gonna kind of go with that, okay? The other thing that is happening on the sign-in sheet, do you put your email address? Do they put their email addresses? Okay, I will have a PDF of this presentation for the people who attended today that I will send out in an email to you, and I will get your email addresses from the sign-in sheet, so please make sure that any confusing letters are clearly indicated, like ones and L's and O's and zeros and things like that. Okay, so with that being said, are there any major issues or concerns that you need me to be aware of before we get started? Okay, fabulous. So first of all, I am not an attorney. I don't even play an attorney on TV, and even if I were attorney, I would not be your attorney. Okay, I cannot give you legal advice. That would be considered malpractice. Okay, I am not giving you legal advice. What I am going to be doing is I'm going to be giving you my understanding and my interpretations of things, as well as the information that I received from a MOOC that I took this summer, massive online open course that was sponsored by Duke and Emory and UNC Charlotte and 3 people through there who all did have JDs and were able to give very, very good advice. There are 3 places on campus that you can go to get answers to specific questions. Depending upon your question, you may get kind of ping-ponged back and forth between these 3 offices. Jan Thornton, who's the director of the Office of Technology Transfer, very, very, very nice, wonderful woman, very open to questions. University Counsel's Office, although based on information I've received in the past, they tend to push you to someone else who's more knowledgeable. And then your subject area specialist at the library. So again, they are not attorneys, but they will help you interpret things as they go along. I also want to let you know of 2 what I consider to be very good resources. One of them is Copyright for Schools by Carol Simpson. Okay, Carol Simpson started out life as an art teacher, became a school librarian, then went to law school. Became a school librarian, became a university professor, went to law school, and now practices school law in Texas. And another work called Copyright Law for Librarians and Educators by Kevin Cruz. He's very well written on the subject as well. They're both easy reads. They're intended to be consumed by educators, not by law students. So they are very helpful. They also have lots of questions and answers and scenarios that will give you some guidance. All right, so how did we all get here? First of all, Auburn's strategic plan is calling for an increase in emphasis on online materials, things like that. Plus, we have other aspects of the university where they talk about having a contingency plan. I don't know if you were here way back when we had the bird flu epidemic. Anybody remember that, where you had to have a contingency in your syllabi? And, well, if we have to close the university because of the flu, we'll just do everything via distance and so on and so forth. Plus, we have an increasingly, am I right, increased use in Canvas as a learning management system. Every semester we have more people using it, okay? We also have the expectations of the millennials that are sitting in our undergraduate classes. 24/7 access to information, 24/7 access to you, things like that. And then we also have our own professional need to have an informed method for making decisions in the moment. Right? If you're working on class material development at 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, counsel's office is closed. You may or may not find your subject area specialist available at the library, and so you need to be able to have in your toolbox a way to make your own decisions, at least to get you through until someone who can give you some more specific information. So, how do you make a decision to use or not to use something? Well, in general, we as educators, whether we're researchers educating future researchers, engineering, psychology, whatever, we want, and I'm making an assumption, and if my assumption is wrong, just kind of duck your head, right? That we want to use materials within the bounds of the law, okay? However, we are frequently confused by that because sometimes the bounds of the law are confusing, and sometimes we feel as if we have a time pressure placed upon us. I have to have this done, oh my gosh, in 3 hours or tomorrow or something like that. In general, we want to avoid felonious behavior. We don't set out to establish criminal records for ourselves, right? And in general, we've heard of fair use, yes, but we may be operating under some misunderstandings about it and not be aware of those misunderstandings. How accurate are my in general assumptions on a scale of 1 to 10? 10? 10? Okay. Let's see where we go. So I am not going to read this to you. I'm just going to say, but this is what the law says about fair use. Okay? It's 147 words. Okay? You may or may not have had this presented to you in the past. Okay? Notice in there that it says that fair use is not an infringement of copyright. It is not. Fair use applies to everyone, regardless of whether you are faculty, graduate student, mom, dad, uncle, aunt, construction worker, whomever. Fair use applies to everyone. Okay. So that all is nice and confusing, right? It doesn't give you very much clarity if you don't understand how to apply and interpret that. So let's talk about things that influence your fair use decisions. First of all, licenses and or contracts. They will trump fair use. So for instance, the databases that we have subscribed to in the library are subscribed to using a license. And the terms of that license can either extend our ability to use things beyond fair use, or they can limit how we can use things, so it would restrict our fair use. Okay? If you have a license, like with Netflix, YouTube, terms of service use, anything like that where you had to check a box that says, I agree, that term of service, those terms of service agreements or those licenses will take precedence over fair use, okay? Then we have these guidelines. You've heard the guideline that says 10% of a printed work you can use, or X number of photographs from a book, or a poem of so many words. Those guidelines also can inform our decisions, but they are not the law. They've been developed by lobbying groups, by interest groups, with experts in various fields, and they've generally been agreed upon as safe recommendations or boundaries that you can use in order to kind of stay within fair use. And people who agree to them agree that if you adhere to those, that they won't, quote unquote, go after you, but they are not the law, and they're not all universally accepted. Okay? Sometimes those guidelines may restrict uses that could be argued to be fair. So it's important when you're looking at those guidelines that you look at them within a context of understanding fair use, because then you can look at your situation and decide whether or not fair use works to your benefit or whether the guidelines work to your benefit. Okay? Policies sometimes can also influence your fair use of materials, particularly if you are associated with K-12 school systems. Is anyone associated with K-12 school systems in here? As a parent? Possibly, as a parent, okay? Some K-12 school systems will have policies, particularly for video use, right? No R-rated movies can be shown, even though I might be able to make a case that, for instance, Schindler's List is the classic archetypal example of this, right? I want to show Schindler's List on a unit, during a unit about World War II in a senior level history class. And while that use may be considered fair, district policy would prohibit me from using it. If I'm a teacher, if, for instance, Auburn University were to have such a policy, I don't believe they do, don't worry, but if they were, then we would be obligated to abide by university policy, even if our use could potentially be considered fair, okay? So how do you make an informed decision? Okay, well, I kept getting questions asked to me, can I do this? Can I do that? From my colleagues and various people. And so I became aware of this MOOC called Copyright for Educators and Librarians this summer. And it was a 4-week MOOC. And it was on the Coursera platform, like I said, between Duke Emory and UNC Chapel Hill. And the focus on it was solely on fair use and understanding ownership of copyrighted materials and things like that. And I considered it to be a toe-dipping exercise. It's like we sat on the edge of the pool and just dangled our feet off the edge, okay? If you go to law school, you can take entire courses on copyright and intellectual property, and this was 4 weeks for 8,000 people across the entire world. So it was not at all the end-all be-all, but it was very, very well done. Plus a lot of prior extensive reading on the subject, and that's kind of where I came from. My strongest takeaways from that experience are 2 things. First of all, one of our assignments was to locate the Auburn University policy, which I've given to you. And then I kind of had to pick myself up off of the floor because I saw that date on the bottom of it and I was a little kind of freaked out about it. And then I looked at it in more detail and noticed that it didn't deal with the use of materials. There have been major changes to the copyright law since 1984, major ones. One of those changes says that the university has an obligation to provide accurate information regarding the use of copyrighted materials to its constituencies. This is what we provide. So we're going to fix this. That's the plan, okay? The other thing that was a really strong takeaway were 5 key questions that helps frame a decision-making structure when you're trying to decide whether or not your use for something can be considered fair, okay? Each question you deal with separately, and then the annotations that you're going to see on the slides this afternoon are based on guidance that we received in our interactions during that course, as well as my own comments and reading from various information. And that first question is whether or not that work is protected by copyright. If the work you want to use, if that image, if that poem, if that essay is not protected by copyright, it's considered to be in the public domain. You do not have to worry about fair use with public domain because public domain means you can do whatever you want with it. You don't have to ask anyone, right? It's like I don't have to ask to go get a brownie at the back of the room. They're public domain brownies, right? Okay? Well, so one of the first resources that I want to show you is this very handy chart. Here we go. That tells you how to determine whether or not something is in the public domain. And you'll get the slides. It will be available to you. You notice there's a downloadable PDF version of it. This chart is updated on a regular basis. Okay? And so depending upon the kind of work that you're dealing with, it will change when it ends up becoming a part of the public domain. Okay? In general, a good rule of thumb that you can follow, if it was published prior to 1923, it's in the public domain. Between 1923 and 1978, there are a whole bunch of ifs, ands, and ifs and thens and things like that, and this chart helps you tease those out. Okay. The other thing that I want to show you, let's come back here, is the copyright catalog. And what this is, anything from 1978 until the present, the copyright ownership is listed in this catalog for things that have had formal copyright protection applied for and granted. So anyone that has written a dissertation, at least, I don't know, did you have to apply for copyright when you did your dissertation? I did for mine. Did you all have to do that for yours? Okay. So you ought to be able to find yourself in here. So if you're really, really bored, go here and, instead of Googling yourself, do a copyright search on yourself and find out what's on here. It's fairly easy to use. They have a basic search, and you could go through and do by keyword, by author, and various kinds of things like that. It's very informative. Okay. So, Now, if you find out that something's in the public domain, what are you allowed to do with it? Right, very good. Now, anything you want, very good. So the next question is if you wrote it, do you still own the copyright rights to it? I had an email 45 minutes ago from a faculty member on campus asking about, hey, who owns the copyright for distance ed materials that they've developed if that person leaves the university? Well, our current copyright policy is a little unclear about that. Okay, in general, you do. Okay.
You meaning who?
You, the author. You, the author. But here's what you need to also remember. All of us fall under this, you have to publish or you don't get promoted kind of a realm of things, right? Well, in order to publish in a peer-evaluated journal, you have to sign a publishing agreement. How many of you have read the agreements that you signed? How many of you chose not to publish based on that agreement? How many of you have kept that agreement? Like if you had to go find that, of course you did. It came from the world of English, keeps everything, right? So you need to read your agreements before you sign them because every contract is negotiable to some extent. And then you need to keep that publishing agreement, especially if you are writing books, because they're bigger and broader, after you sign it, okay? Jan Thornton was telling me about a situation where there was a faculty member on campus who published an article about, I have no idea, and within that article, there were charts that were based on data, okay? Signed the publishing agreement, got published in the journal of whoever what, and was very excited. Then went and reworked that information, used those same charts in another article to another journal, as well as in a third article to a third journal, and was violating the copyright of the first journal because of how the publishing agreement went, okay? So be very careful about how you use your own work, especially if that work has already been published, okay? Read those agreements. For instance, anybody ever travel Amtrak? Yeah, you know they have this new thing that they're doing called Amtrak Writers Residencies. I don't know if you've heard about it. Well, apparently they had 24,000 applications for 16 or 24 different slots or something like that. And the terms in order to apply say this: in submitting an application, the applicant, Susie Smith, hereby grants the sponsor, Amtrak, the absolute, worldwide, and irrevocable right to use, modify, publish, publicly display, tribute, and copy applicant's application in whole or in part for any purpose, including but not limited to advertising and marketing, and to sublicense such rights to any third parties. There were writers who said, wait a minute, because this is kind of creative writing, who said, wait a minute, does that mean that if I send in theoretically my best work because I want to get chosen, and I have a character in that best work, that I can never use that character again at all for anything? Well, if you read this, maybe. There were writers who did not apply because of this. There were 24,000 writers who did apply in spite of this, but there were writers who did not apply because of this. So read before you sign. Jan Thornton is available to help you negotiate contracts. Okay? The second question is there a specific exemption in the copyright law that covers my intended use? The two most commonly used ones for us here on campus are Section 108 and Section 110, and that's for libraries and archives and for classroom use. Okay, RBD uses the one for library and archives. Anybody who is out, is anybody from the vet school? They have their own library out there, so their library can do some things, okay? Section 110, used for classroom use, it deals with face-to-face teaching. This is where the Teach Act comes in, the section on distance education. But Section 110 is a performance and display exemption only. not a reproduction exemption, not a distribution exemption. Okay, so just for performance and display. One of the things that several of us had trouble with this summer was the use of the word cover in this question. Okay, cover in this case doesn't necessarily mean permit. It means govern. So the exemption may govern your use, but it may disqualify your use from being fair. Okay, if what you want to do is distribute and you're relying on the classroom exemptions, it's not a distribution exemption, so you wouldn't be able to necessarily do that. Is that the difference between cover and permit? Okay. The third question is there a license that covers my intended use? Okay, so Creative Commons, has everybody heard of Creative Commons? Yeah, okay. So this is a really nice thing that is relatively new within the last several years, okay? It's a way for authors to be able to give certain permission for other people to use their copyrighted work ahead of time and to place certain kinds of restrictions on it, okay? And there's a way for searching for Creative Commons license kinds of things. And then the question you need to ask is, can you comply with that license? Are you able to do that? And if you can't, do you maybe need to select a different item? One key question that we kept getting asked over and over and over again, do you have to use that picture? Or will any picture of a tiger work? Do you have to use that picture of an apple? Or will any apple work? Okay? Does your institution have a license that governs how you can use the material? This comes into play with library materials. One of the things I did not know, again, before this class, was that apparently the library has negotiated with its licenses for our vendors that it is okay for us to use journal articles in PDF that we retrieve from our library database, that we can distribute those to our students electronically. That is covered under our license. It is permissible. And for the longest time, I always thought that it wasn't. So, I had a conversation with the dean of the libraries, and she's like, oh, no, our licenses let you do that. I'm like, fabulous. So you can do that, okay? The library will be able to help you with any more specific questions about that because they keep all of that information, okay? However, what about if you say, hey, I'd really like to show the video, pick a video. Game of Thrones. We're going to teach an English class on literature of that particular genre, right? Game of Thrones. We're going to show it, but we don't have a copy of it that we can check out from the library, right? So, but you have a Netflix account and you want to just log into your Netflix account and stream that in class. Okay. If you read your terms of service with Netflix, that is actually prohibited. Okay, so you need to make sure that you understand what your license with Netflix or any of your other streaming video would permit. Okay, now if you had a educational reason for using that and you wanted to rent that video from Hastings, you could do it under the classroom exemption. Okay, or you could just tell your students to go home and watch it, because I think that's one homework assignment that they would do. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Okay. So we've had 3 questions and we haven't even gotten to fair use. So notice they are getting less restrictive as we go along. Our 4th question is whether or not your use is covered by fair use. Because even if a license maybe will prohibit it, or even if all of these other things, we can then come on to fair use, right? So those 4 tests, and I'm not going to go very far into depth with each of those 4 tests because this is about the questions, not about the tests, are the purpose and character of the use, okay? And that means whether or not what you're doing is for educational purposes, nonprofit, things like that, okay? Whether the nature of the copyrighted work, okay? If your copyrighted work is very, very creative, a chapter from Harry Potter, versus something that's very, very factual, like a black line outline map of the United States. Creative things have more protection than less creative things, right? The multiplication tables, there's nothing creative about that. You can reproduce those and distribute them to your heart's content, okay? The amount of the work that you're using in proportion to the whole. Again, a rule of thumb, the more of something that you use, the stronger your rationale has to be for that use, okay? It would be difficult to support or to defend making 35 class set copies of War and Peace, right? Not to mention the fact that your department head's going to come after you for your materials budget. Whereas making a single page in order to analyze or review is a lot more defensible. And then the effect of your use on the market or the value of that work. In general, if what you're doing for the purpose of saving money, you're affecting the value of the work. You're affecting the market for the work, okay? If your motivation is to avoid purchasing something, you're gonna lose on that particular test, okay? The first test, though, talks about the purpose and character of the use, and we come back to this concept of transformative use. If your use is transformative in nature, you are in a lot stronger of a fair use position, okay? And how do you know whether or not something is transformative? Well, first of all, are you making a new point? Are you using that work in a way that it was not originally intended to be used, okay? Will your use aid in the understanding or the getting of that new point on the part of your learners? And then have you used no more than is just right? We call this the Goldilocks test, right? If you only use exactly the amount that you have, okay? For instance, courts have ruled that the use of quotes in term papers, dissertations, essays, things like that, are considered to be transformative uses of copyrighted material because whatever assignment it is that you gave them, it certainly was not the intent of the original author of that quote to meet that. Ideally, are you from English? You're nodding as if you're from English.
I have a bachelor's in English.
Okay, so ideally, right, you're bringing quotes in from a variety of places that all lead to a single new point, right? Now, that's if people are good at using quotes. Yeah, okay. So has anybody ever heard of the 4-chord song? Okay, I'm gonna play just a little bit of this for you. I consider this to be a transformative use. Is that too loud?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jordan. I'm Lee. And I'm Winnie. We are the Axis of Awesome.
And
I'm Benny.
Australian.
We've been a comedy rock band for close to 40 years now, and all that time we've never had a hit.
Yeah, but you guys know why.
Why?
Because we never wrote a 4-chord song.
What's that? What's a 4-chord song, Benny?
Well, if you want all the greatest hits from the past 40 years just use 4 chords. Same 4 chords for every song. It's dead simple to write a pop hit.
Just 4?
Yeah, these 4. Here.
Okay, there's some vulgarity.
1, 2, 3, 4 chords.
Sorry, let me get this straight, Chicken Little. What you're trying to say is you can take those 4 chords, repeat them, and pump out every pop song ever. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Off. Yeah, off, Chicken Little.
Just listen. Do you recognise this?
Yeah, that is Don't Stop Believing by Journey. Very
There's
original.
a few more that fit. Check it out. My life is brilliant. My love is pure. I saw an angel. Of that I'm sure.
Well, that's just 2 songs that are similar. That's
Forever young.
3 songs.
I wanna be forever young. I won't hesitate no more. It cannot wait. I'm yours. This is the way you left me. I'm not pretending. No glory, no happy ending. 'Cause you were amazing. If I could, I'd go wherever you will
Okay. They go on and on and on. They go on and on and on. And if again, that link is there for you if you want to go listen to the whole thing. They and any number of years worth of music, and there's some vulgarity, but okay. Also, is everybody familiar with Ron Clark? He's a education guy in Atlanta. Matthew Perry made a movie about him a couple years ago. Anyway, he created this song, a rap song, to help his students learn the presidents of the United States in order. Okay, and that link is available to you there. So these uses are transformative because the people, first of all, the 4-chord song is a parody, so that falls under fair use. They used very little of each song, just enough for you to know each one. And the intent was different than the original intent. The rap song that Ron Clark does, the intention of the first one was to sell a bunch of rap records. He changed it all up and then used it to be teaching the presidents of the United States, okay? Also, any type of kind of collages that you have. I have a colleague that used to teach art, and he had students create images and use photographs or pictures from magazines to create the actual image of itself. So one of them did a silhouette of a lion, and he used all sorts of different images of lions from various magazines to fill in the different pieces of it. Whether those came from advertisements, whether they came from National Geographic, I don't know, okay? These are all examples of transformative use, okay? The last question you need to ask when it all comes down to all of this is whether or not you need permission from the copyright owner to use that work in your intended way. Okay? Now, here's where things get a little kind of fuzzy because there are these creatures out there called orphan works. And orphan works are still protected by copyright, but no one knows where the copyright owner is. Or the copyright owner is dead. So technically, according to the letter, you can't use copyrighted materials in certain ways unless you get explicit permission. But if you have no idea who to ask, or that person is dead and they have no heirs, then you're in this kind of legal limbo, okay? The general advice that we got, okay, was in 2 areas with this. First of all, Congress has had a couple of times some suggestions about how to handle orphan works, some explicit legislation that would basically say, look, do your due diligence. If you can prove that you've tried and tried and tried again, then you can use things. That hasn't passed yet at all. The other one is you have to make a risk assessment, okay? The risk associated with using copyrighted material from Madonna, pretty high. The risk associated with using copyrighted material from someone who wrote a song and that person has died and they have no heirs and it's just kind of sitting out there. Like Raj, right? Yeah, like Raj, no, yeah. You do, right? But if we throw your kids under the bus and they don't inherit your copyright or anything like that, so is relatively low because you can only be sued for copyright infringement by the person who owns the copyright. So you have this circular logic going on. Now, if the answer that you receive is no when you ask for permission, you actually still have a choice. You can choose to continue to use that work and hope and pray you don't get sued. I'm a little more risk averse than that. Or you can find something else that will meet your needs. Or you can go and ask them again and go, I don't think you really understood what I was asking. What I really meant was this. Sometimes you get an answer that says, absolutely, you can use that. That'll be $5,000. You then can choose to pay them or not use the work. And that's where the question about, do you need that item or will any item like that work just as well? Okay, so risk aversion. In general, fair use decisions rest on a continuum from I really don't care what I do and I'm going to do whatever I want, all the way over here, to very, very conservative, which means unless it is explicitly granted to me somewhere in writing, I'm not going to do it. Okay? There are organizations like the Center for Media and Social Impact, and they sent that man that the library came and had come speak about copyright with the ePortfolio project a year or so ago. Remember him? He has a very liberal view on fair use, very liberal. Then you have other organizations such as music and film and publishers and things like that. They want to have a more conservative view because they want to make money. They want to control their access, right? There are no hard and set rules, unfortunately, and you have to come to your own personal comfort level. Are you on the conservative end of things, or are you on the liberal end of things? And then you just have to work within those realms, okay? So, regardless of where you are on that risk continuum, regardless of where you are, whenever you use copyrighted materials, you ought to be able to say, if someone asks you, why you're using that, or how did you determine to do that? If you work your way through these 5 questions, you ought to be able to have an answer to all of those that leads you to your decision. Okay? So, one special note, and then we'll move on to questions and things like that. I have heard a lot of people tell students that if you plagiarize, you are automatically violating copyright. That plagiarism and copyright infringement are the same. They're not. They're not at all. Okay? The difference between plagiarism and copyright infringement is plagiarism is an ethics issue. It's an authorship issue. It's saying that you wrote something when you really didn't. Copyright infringement is a violation of statutory law. Now, can you plagiarize and not violate copyright? Yeah, you can. For instance, I could tell you that I wrote this particular piece. It's short. I could tell you that I wrote that. I wrote that. That's short enough. I did not violate copyright. I plagiarized by saying that I wrote that. Okay? I'm not that good. I'm not that good. Okay? So that's why if you take a whole bunch of quotes from a paper, even though you cite them, you still can be plagiarizing, but not be violating copyright. Okay? So they're related, but they are not synonymous. So these other tools that you have available, I already looked at 2 of them. And then there's this one from UNC Charlotte, which is this wonderful expanded checklist, okay, where it asks you a series of questions with yes/no answers, and then it tells you where to go and what to do as soon as you need to pop out of that little decision-making flow chart. Okay, so that's going to be available to you as well. I already showed you the texts, but the citations are here for you. And so now I would like to answer any questions. Did anybody write anything down on their cards? All the cards are blank. You're willing to tell me what your questions are?
I wrote something, but I'm willing to ask it out loud.
Okay.
So you had mentioned that Auburn's, we have a license on the use of articles that are downloaded from our database.
Mm-hmm.
How does that apply at all to articles that we get through interlibrary loan? And if not, how do you deal with that?
My first answer to that is you talk to the people in the interlibrary loan office because they're tasked with knowing the exact answer to that. My impression, my kind of gut reaction is we don't know what licenses that other institution has, and there is under Section 108 for the libraries exemptions, it discusses interlibrary loan and things like that, and the law addresses that. Some of the issues associated with that, there's a limit on the number of items that you can receive from any one particular journal, from any one particular library, and they have to make sure that it's for personal use only and all of these things. That's why we have offices of interlibrary loan at the library, so that we don't have to keep track of that. They keep track of all of that, and that is their charge. I will tell you where I am on the risk aversion continuum. I tend to be over on the conservative end of things, because I was dealing with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders in a previous life, and I just didn't want to have to, worry about anything. So I would not do that. What you could do is provide them a citation. And if you can get it through interlibrary loan, so can your students. Other questions? Sorry, yes.
So what happens with the programming in codes? So, I don't know.
Your computer
shape
science?
code, industrial engineering.
Industrial engineering, okay. And you're going to write a program to do something?
Yeah.
Okay. So computer code is copyrighted?
Okay.
Okay. So whoever writes it, in general, owns it.
So, but the thing is, if somebody just actually read through the code, he can just kind of write the code another way, but it will do the same thing.
If
So-
they write a different kind of code, so you have steps 1 through 5 and they manage to write it in 3 steps, then those 3 steps are their code. That would be my initial feeling on this. So there are mentions in the copyright law about whether or not you can reverse engineer and whether or not you can like hack into things, particularly on protective devices on DVDs to keep you from being able to make copies and things like that, and you're not supposed to do that. But again, if you're a graduate student or a faculty member and you write, well, you know, somebody wrote COBOL, somebody wrote Pascal, somebody did a long time ago, okay? And if you write the next greatest assembly language at Auburn University, then I'd have a conversation with Jan Thornton, because that's going to be some bank. Next question. Yes.
I'm planning a discussion-based class that I'm teaching in the spring, where there will be a lot of readings. And how do you go about teaching a text that you don't own in a way that follows those
Well, let me ask you this. How would you do it before you'd had this workshop?
I would have basically given them links to a course site through the library where they can access stuff, and then they get it, and then we talk.
So you would
about
assign
it.
readings,
I would assign, yeah.
right? Whether it's from an anthology or whether it's from a primary source or something to that effect.
Right.
And then you would develop discussion questions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then either in class face-to-face or online, depending on how you're going to do it, you would lead and proctor that discussion, or not proctor, moderate that discussion.
Yeah.
You're not putting the entire text of the book online, are you?
No.
Okay. You say, go get a copy of this book and read these pages.
If I want to put, say, a chapter of a book online, PDF it for them.
So what is your motivation behind doing that?
That there's a book this long and they only need 7 pages.
Okay. Is that a book that could be put on reserve?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. You can put an original item, a book, on reserve as many times as you want in the library, if all you want for them to do is read a particular chapter.
Yeah.
Some publishers will do custom books where you can pull a chapter from this book and a chapter from that book and a chapter from that book, and then they'll bind it together. So you may want to talk to your publisher rep about doing that. Also, the bookstore, is anybody from the bookstore here? The bookstore will get copyright clearance on course packs.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's 3 or 4 different ways that you could do that. My favorite is tell them to find the chapter and read it. But I'm a horrible and mean person.
Well,
She wants me to read it.
I know, exactly.
that's the issue.
Yeah, yeah,
When you're with undergrads,
exactly.
you can't make them work too hard to get to the readings.
Right, right.
So we're trying to develop distance learning courses, right?
Yep.
And distance learning courses could have people in different geographic locations, some
Yes.
of which are not necessarily covered by US copyright law.
Yes. But
So how does that all work, and is the originating, it's an Auburn course, does that automatically involve Auburn students?
the question, do you need me to repeat the question? Okay. One of the major changes to US copyright law that happened since 1984 is that we have become signatories to an international convention called the Berne Convention. And a couple things came as a result of that. One of them is you no longer have to have the circle C symbol on something in order for it to be protected by copyright. As soon as it is in fixed and tangible form, it is protected. Now, if you want to sue someone for copyright, you need to register with the Copyright Clearance Center for that, but that is relatively inexpensive, less than $50 the last time I checked. That's one of them. The second thing that came as a result of that is we extended our terms of copyright protection. And the third thing that came as a result of that is that the US and other countries agreed to enforce each other's copyrights. So it used to be that you had to apply for a copyright in France and a copyright in England and a copyright in here and a copyright in there in order to have your work protected internationally. And that was not a loophole, but that was a way that lots of nefarious characters used to violate people's copyright. Margaret Mitchell, who wrote Gone with the Wind, actually a lot of her works were improperly translated into Dutch and published in Holland against the US copyright because we were not signatories at that time. So I would say, as I'm not an attorney, I would say since the university is offering the course that we would be expected to adhere to US copyright law, which also means we are expected to honor the copyrights of other international people for international works. Students enrolled at Auburn University are responsible for adhering to those policies as well. That would be my particular take. However, Jan Thornton, the director of the Office of Technology Transfer, who actually has a degree and has specialized in intellectual property, would probably have a better answer. And that's definitely one of the questions that when we go and we're revisiting the policy, that we'll make sure that we discuss and come up with FAQs or something to that effect to answer that question. That was a really good non-answer in my opinion.
Can I
Sure.
follow up on that? That would also apply then to intellectual property in terms of faculty, let's say creating a new course, and they're putting their own original materials, let's say based on their research or their computer code or whatever, they're putting this online and they're teaching an international distance education course.
Yeah, and so some of the implications of that are though, say for instance, you do at some point have to decide what you're going to make publicly available. And there are those on this campus who are our colleagues who are very, very, very careful about what they discuss in public because they're afraid of people taking their code or taking their ideas or using their work without getting permission or without attribution. So I wouldn't put cutting edge code as a teaching tool in an online course with a group of students that honestly you don't know who they are or where they're coming from. Now, maybe in a doctoral seminar with people that you've been working with and that you've got their dissertations and their lives under your thumb, you might have some more control. That's something to consider. What of yours are you going to make public? The other thing that you need to do, anything that you do make public that you want to be able to protect in a court of law, you need to make sure is registered with the Copyright Clearance Center. And so it doesn't take long, it's not difficult to do that. So it's just something to think about. The internet is great and distance education is great because we are becoming more ubiquitous. We're increasing the access of information available to people and all these other things. But with that come these additional challenges. It used to be hard. It used to be hard to violate people's copyright because it was monks sitting at desks with feather quills and gold ink that were illuminating manuscripts, and it took months to make the Bible. Well, and Gutenberg came along and ruined that, right? And so it is now so easy mechanically to violate copyright that we have all of these other things that we need to think about.
So if we quote scripture, is that violating?
Well, if you quote it, you're fine.
Okay.
So
if I
probably
say I
as
wrote
before
it-
1920.
Right, as long as you don't say, right, as long as you don't say that I said, let there be light, right? Because exactly, and you're not using a light switch. So I have a colleague that uses a light switch and turns it on and goes, what I know, and turns it off. What you know. Me, you, me, you. And I'm like, how is that helpful? But, illumination, I suppose. What other questions can I answer?
Okay. What about the question in the book? So I'm teaching, there's some question in the book, for example, question 2, 3, 4. Can I put it online or just mention that you need to do question 2, 3, 4? Or I can just copy the questions?
What does your license with the publisher say?
I just have the book.
You adopted the book officially and it is a text.
Yeah, it's just a book. I just bought the book.
But it's not a text for a course.
It is.
So your students bought the book as well. So why
So
would
I
you
don't
need
know
to put those
if-
questions
I don't know if
online?
all of them bought the book or not.
Were they supposed to?
Well, it's a book.
Is it a required book?
Yeah.
They were assigned to buy it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So this is me being mean and horrible and hateful to undergraduates, right? Are there undergraduates in the room? I do apologize. Right? If you are assigned to buy a book and your teacher, yeah, we have to edit that. If you're assigned to buy a book and your teacher says read chapter 2 and answer the questions at the end of chapter 2 to prove to me that you read it, and your excuse is I can't answer the questions because I didn't buy the book, well then you get a big fat 0. That's my perspective. I would check with your publisher. It may be that they say, hey, since you adopted the book, a question sometimes comes up, what do I do with the ancillary materials? Like your text will come with a set of PowerPoints, right? And they're really well done. They're, white, black text on white backgrounds. I actually had one once where the first slide of everything said that alteration, public display, public performance, or modification is prohibited under any circumstances. So I called the publisher, and it took 3 or 4 tries, and I said, so this slide says I'm not allowed to use this. And they were like, no, that's not what that means. I said, that's what it says. Like, but that's not what that means. I went, but that's what it says. So I need someone from your company to tell me whether or not A, I can use this in class. B, load it into our learning management system. C, what if I want to cut a couple of slides out because I'm not using pages 5 through 8 in the chapter or something to that effect. Or if I want to add a couple of slides to more fully illustrate. They're like, well, you adopted the book, right? I said, yeah. I said, I need you to say it's okay because everything else says that it's not. So call the publishers. I think in general, if you've adopted the text, you can use the information in the text. You still need to quote it. But again, I take a more conservative view, which is if everybody has to buy it, then I don't need to put anything online that's in the book. Yeah.
You mentioned something that made me a little nervous.
Oh, no.
So I graduated from here with an MS in 2010. My thesis has been available through the AU library thesis. It's online. You can Google me and there it is. Do I still have to copyright it?
You probably applied for copyright before you graduated.
I don't remember anything like that.
Well,
I think I wrote on it copyright 2010.
yeah,
because
so it's fixed in tangible format, but you I think the graduate school requires that of graduate students.
Well, having just done that as well with my dissertation, I could have ProQuest file on my behalf.
Yeah?
Or I could not.
Oh, and you could
do it
file.
on my own if I wanted.
Okay.
There was no.
At my institution, it was a requirement. It was a requirement at my institution, so, yeah.
Do you think this is a Clellis question?
Potentially, yeah. But now you also have a resource for something where you can search for copyright ownership. So you can go search for yourself.
Also, if I go to publish part of that or that part of that thesis in a journal, am I then plagiarizing myself?
You're not
How does
going to
that
publish
work?
your exact thesis, right?
No, but I'm going to cut and paste significant chunks of it.
It's going to have a different flow. You're going to be reworking it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So it's a different.
Okay. And then in the case of my dissertation, which I'm doing now, it's not at all in a different format. I'm doing a chapter format where you have intro and then
4
journal
articles.
article 1, journal article 2,
Yeah.
journal article 3, and then conclusion that wraps it all together.
So I would suggest talking with your subject area specialist at the library,
Okay.
talk with Jan Thornton, but the unit is the dissertation.
Right.
Chances are you're going to have to do something to the chapters in order to get them published. Chances are. They're not just going to accept it.
That's how we're
That's how
writing
records
it.
is.
Yeah.
It's exactly like that. It says in his dissertation, it says this is published under so-and-so public.
Okay.
She can give herself permission.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you own the copyright, then you can do
I think the
that.
journal will take ownership of the copyright.
Yeah.
once it's
At that point?
submitted.
Well, when you read your publishing agreement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that happens a lot in our school though.
yeah, and I don't think anybody talks about it.
They might, yeah, they may, and see, that's what's happened. We have, we have these online journals, we have all this other stuff. The one thing I did want to say about putting textbook information online in a learning management system, what you can do under fair use, and frequently you see this at the beginning of semesters, you tell the bookstore you're going to have 30 people in the class and they order 15 books. And so the first 15 eager beavers get their books, and then the other people are going, I need to order it online, it hasn't come in yet. It is permissible under fair use to make a PDF of the first week's worth of readings, so like maybe chapter 1 and chapter 2, depending on what you've assigned. Put those in the learning management system as long as your students can prove that they've already ordered the book. Because then you're not taking away from the market, you're not replacing anything, and it's simply a time-shifting situation. And then what you do is you remove those links as soon as those books have come in. Or you could make a hard copy on the photocopy machine of chapter 1 and chapter 2, hand it to the students who can show you a receipt that they've already purchased the book, and then have them return those to you and destroy those copies after those books already come in. That would be considered fair use. So especially at the beginning of the term, where there's this mad scramble to make sure everybody gets it. You can't do that if they haven't purchased the book. So I usually ask people, I say, show me a confirmation that you've purchased the book, and then I'll give you a copy of this.
Sounds like a lot of policing on the instructor's part.
Well, or you could just say, tough, I'm not going to give it to you. I mean, it's a choice either. It's a choice either way. But again, remember, I'm coming from a more conservative kind of a thing, and I teach technology courses for people who are going to be K-12 teachers. And parents tend to be the ones, like parents were the ones that have turned schools in the past for copyright violation, disgruntled parents. So I don't want my students to be on the bad end of a disgruntled parent, right? And if being conservative prevents that, then I'm cool with that. Other questions? Fill out your green forms, yes. And we are over our time, right? We were supposed to go to 1:15?
We're flexible between 1:15 and 1:30.
Oh, okay. So if anybody, feel free to, if you need to leave, please leave. But if you still have questions, I'm here
We could wrap up
for a little bit. I mean, our accrediting team is here today, and this is what I'm doing instead of meeting with really, really, really important people. So
You have a question? Yeah, digital media question.
This is a bit off topic. Let's say I want to purchase a CD on eBay, right?
Yeah.
And I go ahead and pay $3 for it.
for Air Supply or Journey or somebody like that, yes.
And do I immediately own it the very second that I purchase it, or does it have to be in my hand? So, for example, if I purchase it on eBay, then immediately download like a torrent file of the same.
A what file?
What would be illegally digital? That I just purchased it.
Well, that's a little different, okay? Because there's the Home Use Recording Act that governs, for instance, if you own a CD, you can burn that CD, not burn it, but you can transfer those songs to your MP3 player so you can play them in the car if you don't have a CD player, and you're fine, okay? You can't burn that CD to a shared drive and share that with other people, okay? You can physically loan your CD to your friend, okay? So because it's music and because it's MP3 and because it's a digital copy that will identically duplicate every time you reproduce it, I get a little hinky when you, I would say have that disc in your hands.
So you probably don't own it.
Right, because a lot of those download places will only let you download if you've paid, or if you, the courts have ruled on Napster. The courts have ruled on file sharing and things like that. And they were found to be infringements.
Thank you.
Yeah. And children have been caught in that, by the way, right? There was a little girl, like middle school aged girl, who got nabbed by and her grandmother, yeah, exactly. And her granny was like, what? I was in bed. She was up late. So, so it's a cautionary tale about leaving your password out for children or whatever. But other questions? Yes, no?
You're not
Thank
as
you for
fun.
coming.
You're not as fun as